Every game I showed so far is where white or black has good outpost for the knight in the center. And in every game, it was converted to a win, or not converted to a win because of a bad play, with the different plans. When you have dominating knight in the center, you, according to position, you have to play on a deep end game, for a deep end game, or you play for tactics using that knight, or you're playing for attack, for improving position. And in every example, plan was different. Here is the game that was played in my presence in 1972 in Moscow between Anatoly Karpov and Mark Taimanov. E4, C5. We're going to see now very different approach to the position with outpost. E6, D4, CD, knight takes D4, A6, bishop D3. Those two players played so many games with Sicilian, and Taimanov, I don't think he has ever in his life played on E4 any other opening than Sicilian. So after knight B3, bishop B6, castle, knight E7, queen E2, knight C6, bishop E3, knight E5. This is all the opening moves first. C4, bishop takes E3, queen takes E3, queen C7, and C5. Well, we're going to get soon position to the position with outpost. Knight takes E3, queen takes D3, B6, white takes and black takes, and white goes knight D2. And here, Taimanov played D5. Well, there is a big positional threat of knight C4 coming knight D6, so D5 prevents knight C4, and now E5, and here we got the position. White has good outpost for the knight on D4. Bishop D7 was played. Rook F to C1. Black castled, queen D4. White doesn't mind going to the end game where they're going to have very strong knight on D4. And if this knight gets, well, in this position, if this knight ever gets challenged, there is second knight to take the position on D4. Taimanov didn't like this endgame, and I don't blame him. So he played queen B8. Now knight F3, the other knight is preparing to take the outpost. After knight F3, knight C6. Queen E3, rook C8. Rook C5. A5, rook AC1, A4, and knight D4. Okay, white accomplished its goal. Knight is on D4. That is the outpost that white is going to keep to the rest of the game. After knight D4, knight A5 was played. There is no way black cannot take on B2 because they are simply losing the piece. And if they take on D4, then white can take with the queen first. And the knight on D4 is still, the D4 outpost is still saved for the knight on f3. So white has very big advantage. Knight a5 was played, trying to go knight c4. Rook takes c8, bishop takes c8, and b3. You see, when you have outpost for the knight, it's not only important that you create a play and blast your opponent with using this outpost. No, it's also important to restrict your opponent's pieces if you can. And this is exactly what is happening now. After b3, bishop d7, now white plays h4. Eventually white wants to start attack on the king side because they have knight on d4. It's a lot more difficult to organize play on the queen side because this bishop on d7 will be playing and black has all its pieces on the queen side. That's how you determine where black has problems getting its pieces on a king side. So play has to be conducted on a king side using what? A very powerful knight on d4 and very strong pawn on e5, which gives you space advantage. So h4, h6, and white has no problem playing g4. It's not weakening your king because there is no single piece of black's can come to the queen side. After g4, queen b7, h5 was played. g5 is coming. Well, actually g5 immediately would have been okay also in an h5, g6, getting outpost for the second knight. But there is no rush. Black has very bad position. Knight c6, now g5, knights were exchanged, but you see the other knight is on d4 now, hg, queen takes g5, and king h7. After rook c3, it's obvious now that black's king is absolutely hopeless here. All rook on c3 will go to the king side, knight on d4 is very close to the king side, and queen on g5, three big pieces attacking, and black is going to be absolutely hopeless. Queen b4, attacking rook and knight, rook g3, threatening mate on g7, rook g8, and there it is. Now knight comes to f3. When I mentioned that knight on d4 is very close to attacking black's king, here all three pieces participating in the attack against black's king. Game ended real quickly. AB, AB, and queen takes b3 was played. Well, a little better defense would have been queen f8. Then white plays knight f4 and knight g5. Position is extremely bad for black. However, black chose easy way out of it. They played queen takes b3, and after queen c1, it's all over. It's a quite move, threatening knight g5 check and winning black's queen on b3, and also knight g5 check, winning the pawn on f7. There is no defense now after queen c1. Queen a2 was played, knight g5 check, king h8, knight takes f7, and now there is a deadly mating threat after queen g5, queen b1 check, king h2. Black simply has no move. if queen f5, then this is a checkmate. So very well conducted plays. Believe it or not, if we go to middle game position, let's go to position here. You see that knight on d4 practically controls all center of the board. And after knight a5, white has green light attacking blacks after taking, and very important b3 move restricting the knight on a5. Now white has green light attacking black's king. Well, a knight on a5 is hopeless, so white can do anything they want, and little attack on the queen side will be decisive. It's a very good example. You see, now we just used this big outpost and dominating knight on d4 and the blockaded position in its center for delivering final blow on the king side. Those examples are extremely important, and if you studied them without knowing how to play these positions, it's almost impossible to make significant progress in chess. That's why it's good to study from the games of very strong players. And this is one great example of it. Next, two examples, two games, are little different type of outposts for the knight than we have seen before. Outposts that we've seen that when knight has one very strong point, it stands there and dominates. But there are some positions, some games, like this next one, where outposts, black has swinging outposts. Let me explain you what I mean. e4, e5. Game, by the way, was played between quite famous grandmaster from Argentina, Miguel Quinteros, and Bent Larsen, very famous Bent Larsen. Knight f3, knight c6. Larsen is black, and he played very good positional game. Knight e7, c3, a6. Knight e7 was played, well, Larsen, we know, always likes unorthodox opening, although knight e7 is a part of the theory. Bishop a4, d6, d4, bishop d7, h4, h6, and white played h5. Well, after ed, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, c takes d, and d5, e5. We're going to go quickly through the opening moves. Queen takes a4, knight c6, bishop e3, queen d7. Black has some kind of control on the light squares. You see f5 square, e6 square, and position, in my opinion, approximately equal. Knight c3, and here, very good plan. What black is intending is getting control on light squares. In order to get control on light squares, you want to get rid of white's knight on c3 that can possibly interfere with it. So bishop b4, and after bishop is exchanged for knight, bishop on e3, white's bishop, cannot be controlling any white squares, and then knight can get some good outposts. Bishop b4 is a very good positional move. queen c2, both sides castled, and that indicates that there will be kingside attacks from both sides. When normally in a chess, if you castle on the opposite sides of the board, that's the case. There will be attack on both kings, especially when the center is closed, and that's the case in this position. Bishop takes c3. Now, after white castled, black doesn't want knight on c3 to escape exchange. Bishop takes, queen takes c3, and now very preventive move, f6. f6 because black doesn't want to be run over by f4 and g4. After f6, f4, and now a5. What is the idea of a5? Is to go a4, a3 and checkmate it? No. Idea is to go a4 and then knight a5 and knight c4 to get outpost for the knight. a5 is good preparation for it. a3 and now a4. It looks like big mistake. Why would black play a4 and close the position when they can go b5 and try to go b4? b5 is a huge positional mistake because, first of all, you don't open any position on the queen side, and then it gives your knight absolutely no options. a4, of course, is a very good move. King b1, knight a5, and there it is. Knight got an outpost on c4. And I will tell you later, we're going to look later what the swinging outpost means. So knight a5, queen d3, knight c4, bishop d2, f takes c. White took with d pawn, because now if they take with f pawn, black is also going to have very strong g file, and queen g is going to come to g4 position. It's like white is going to be losing on both sides of the board. So d takes e is absolutely forced. Rook a to d8. Well, to protect the d5 pawn in case bishop moves. So I don't know if it was the best move. After bishop c1, b5, and there is absolutely dominating knight on c4. Well, after b5, rook he1, rook fe8, while preventing white from playing e6, rook fe8, queen f3, c5, rook d3, d4. You see, black's pawns in the center are moving. White's pawns are not moving. Why is it? Because of the knight on c4. Knight on c4 prevents white from playing f5, and black is moving, and now they're about to get concrete threats if they go b4. Now after d4, rook e to d1, and here is very powerful move, knight a5. Now let's explain this position. Suppose you have this position, what you have to do? You cannot go b4 now because you're going to lose pawn in its center, and now knight on c4 loses outpost, and this is not the right thing to do. You need to go c4. Knight goes to a5 and to b3, where it's going to support the d pawn, and after that you can go c4. So you're swinging knight from one outpost to second outpost on b3, and that makes your pawn chain moving and delivering the final blow to white's position. After knight a5, which is very powerful move, white is absolutely lost. g4, knight b3, rook e1, and c4. You see, this couldn't be prevented. So after c1, rook d1, and now b4, white must take, and d3. What that means is white's king is absolutely smothered with this pawn structure and with the knight, and black wants to go a3 and penetrate with the queen on a4. The game is over in just a couple of moves. And after d3, bishop d2, a3, b takes a, knight d4, it's just removing knight from b3, and after knight d4, queen f2, queen a4, there is no need to continue. Bishop c3 was played, knight e2, rook cannot take the knight because white loses both rooks, and after knight e2 attacking c3 bishop, there is no defense. Bishop b2, queen c2 check, white simply resign. On any move there will be c3, and it's all hopeless. Beautiful game, swinging knight. Well, this is like where black had great outpost on c4 for the knight. They decided to move the pawns. Now knight is on the way, but knight luckily has second outpost on b3, where pawns become mobile, and that will end the game. This is absolute great example of positional play that gets you to the mating attack, and it's another example of using dominating knight versus bishop. Two outposts we have seen in this game. Very, very instructive game. Now, watching this game, I played game in 1977 in Hastings, England, where I won the tournament. It was very good year for me. And I played game against American Grandmaster James Tarjan. And game was also, I got advantage of having knight versus bishop and how this knight was swinging from one outpost to another. Let's look at this game. I was black, it was Nimzo Indian, and I was very big fan of Hubner variation in this opening. e3, c5, bishop d3, knight c6, knight f3, bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, d6. Now black's idea is to play e5 and get type of position where knights are better than bishops. And this type of positions are close positions, of course. So e4, e5, d5, knight e7, and knight h4. Now this was played before, and it was played in a Spassky-Fischer match. And in this position, after knight h4, h6 was played, and f4. This is exactly position from that game. And I analyzed and I have my own opinion about it, and I was watching Fischer-Spassky match in 72. I was watching it in progress. So after f4, knight g6. That's the move Fischer played against Spassky, and knight takes g6, fg, and Spassky played f takes e. And commentators to this game said that this could have been a wrong decision. It would have been better to castle. And that's exactly what Tarjan did, who followed the modern theory at that time. Castle, and I castled also. And now queen e1. After queen e1, white wants to play queen g3, and they want black to take on f4, in which case it's going to be very difficult to stop e5, and this is not a good idea for black. So after queen e1, bishop d7 was played, and on queen g3, queen e8. We cannot let black's bishop to get to f4, so we are not taking on f4. But now there is a threat of knight h5, and after queen e8, white played f5, and I played g5. That's the position I was aiming for. I mean, I was aiming for this pawn structure, and I think position is very good for black. They have a knight. That's something white doesn't have. And in these close positions, knight is very good. Of course, knight has no outposts yet and no concrete mission that can be assigned to a knight. But once positions changes, knight will have certain future. So after center was closed, and in this position, white played queen h3. To stop knight h5, I guess. Well, it doesn't really stop it, but on knight h5, they can simply go g3, and knight on h5 is not placed well. So after queen h3, queen h5, endgame is very good for black. Queen e3, a6. Notice knight g4 doesn't do anything because of queen g3, will be just waste of time. a6, bishop d2, and b5. So we try to open position a little to create some battlefield where knight may be active. After b5, rook a to e1. Rook e1 is played to get an additional support for e4 pawn. I played b takes c. And before taking on c4, white played bishop e2, queen f7, bishop takes c4, bishop b5. Here, black is trying to get control on b file and penetrate with all its pieces, and knight on f6 will have a decisive role in the game. So after bishop b5, queen d3, rook f to b8, h3, queen b7, bishop c1, trying to guard the b2 penetrating square. Bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, and now I played queen b5. I want to exchange queens because after exchanging queens, it's going to be a lot easier to penetrate on b5. White has no choice but exchanging queens, but at the same time, this queen takes b5 will be disastrous because white, I will take with the a pawn and then play rook a4, and you're going to see the e4 pawn is hopelessly lost, and so is a pawn. So white has to exchange queens, but by playing queen e2, which is also very good for black. Rook b1, king f2, king must have assigned the mission of protecting the e4 pawn. After king f2, rook a b8, king e3, and rook b5. Rook b5 has idea possibly playing rook a5 and rook a4, attacking the e4 square pawn. King d3, rook a1, rook c2. Well, idea was penetrating rook to b1, but now very strong move, c4 check. You see, this knight has dominance over the bishop on c1. King takes c4 looks really terrible for white, so they played king e3. After c4 check, king e3, rook to b1, rook to e1, and here comes the decisive maneuver. Knight is getting its outpost. Knight h5, coming to f4 and d3. After knight h5, king d2, knight f4, rook g1, knight d3, pawn g3, and it's a very pitiful position. They're absolutely immobile, so they can't move anything. But black has to deliver the final assault. After g3, king f7. It may not have been necessary, but it doesn't hurt to get king closer. King e7. And after rook g1, king d7. King come closer, it's for free, because all white has to do is to play with the rook on a back rank. And after king d7, rook f1, now I got a clear plan how I wanted to win the game. a5, and everything is forced. It's easy to see the forced win when you know that your opponent cannot move anything. Now after rook g1, knight c5, rook has to protect the pawn, and knight b3 check. Everything is forced. Every move is forced. Pawn has to be, knight has to be taken, c takes b, and this tactical shot is not, it's like logical thing, because in positions like this happens, this has to be happening because black has such a big positional advantage. After c4, a4, you see, there is nothing white can do. They cannot play king c3 because rook a takes on b2, and there is no move, absolutely. They played rook e3, but then rook takes b2 check, rook takes b2. I could have done it move before, but this one is even easier, and white simply resigned here. On king c3, simple a3 move. It's a very good, very instructive game on using. Sometimes you have knight. You know that knight is better than bishop when there are 8 pawns on board from each side. and you don't know exactly where it's going to be used. When you continue your plan of making progress with your rest of the pieces, eventually your knight's mission will be a lot clearer. That's exactly what happened in this game. And it wasn't very difficult to play for black. Actually, I felt like I was playing this game, and everything is like it comes by itself. And well, once you have a knowledge of what to do in these kinds of positions, it's just executing what you know. It's like in any other subject, in math, in geometry, in science, everything. Whatever you know, you're using your knowledge. And there is not much imagination in this game. But it was very clean and very instructive game.